Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead and open up your Jesus book to to Genesis chapter 26. Genesis chapter 26. Read of Isaac and Abimelech. Genesis chapter 26. Now there was a famine in the land besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, Do not go down to Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell you, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and to your offspring will I give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father, and I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands, and to your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, She is my sister. For he feared to say, my wife, thinking lest the men of this place should kill me because of Rebekah, and because she was very attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out the window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah his wife. So Abimelech called to Isaac and said, Behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister? Isaac said to him, Because I thought, lest I die because of her. Abimelech said, What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, Whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. And Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped up with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we. So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped over the death of Abraham. And he gave them names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley, they found there a spring of water. The herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, The water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well and quarreled over that also. He called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, For the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him in the same night and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and I will bless you, and I will bless your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there and said to Isaac's servants, pitched his tent there, and Isaac's servants dug a well. When Abimelech went over to him from Gerar with Ahuzzath, his advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his army, Isaac said to them, Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you? They said, We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, Let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good and sent you away in peace. So now you are blessed of the Lord. So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they rose early, exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about a well they had dug, and said to him, We have found water. He called it Shabah. Therefore the name is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac. and Rebekah. All right. First question I had when reading this, I don't know why I didn't have it with Abraham, but where is Gerar? It's a really cool word to say. Sounds like you're just growling. But where is Gerar? Gerar is southwest of Jerusalem, southwest of Bethlehem, southeast of Gaza. In fact, that area inside the Dead Sea that a lot of scholarly folks would think is Sodom and Gomorrah, that part that juts out and turns up, it's about due west of there, maybe a little north, and that's the land of Gerar. Gerar had a valley. The valley was below it. It was south of it, and it was southeast of it. There's a river that runs, I'm not sure if it runs northwest toward the Mediterranean or if it runs off of a mountain down toward the southwest, but there's a river that goes northwest to southeast in this area that goes into a plain down toward Beersheba. So Gerar is on this map, is where we're going to start, where Abimelech is from, where Isaac goes to, and then Isaac is going to migrate in a southerly or a southeasterly direction toward and end up in Beersheba, and so that's where we are. This helps us to understand why Egypt might be such a temptation. Look, I love the mountains, and I know that there are some even here who don't love mountains. Mountainous terrain is difficult to go over. Isaac has been blessed with an incredible amount of flocks, and for him to drive all of that cattle and all of those flocks over the mountains might be a little bit difficult. But it's plains all the way around toward Egypt. And there's a lot of rivers that way as well. So maybe helps us to understand where he's at in reference to where Egypt is as to why that might be a temptation. Remember that Isaac has all of the things that Abraham was blessed with. Ishmael does receive some inheritance in which he is sent off and he goes to live elsewhere. We won't follow his story if you're missing out on it. I can talk to you about it later. You can read that chapter on your own. But here, Isaac has received all of the things that Abraham has been given. That's how his wife is promised to him. And even in that, there's a famine in the land, and when he plants, he receives back 100-fold. Now, I saw two different reports in studying on that. How much are you supposed to get back when you plant? One estimate was 25%. So you would receive back 25-fold of what it was that you planted. Others have said that even during a good year, you can receive back 60%, or I guess that would be 250% or 600% of what you have sown 60-fold. That would be the thing you got back 60 times over. So you plant 1 grain of corn and you receive back 1 stalk of corn, making, oh boy, this is wonderful. But here, during the famine, he is going to receive back 100-fold. So the Lord is blessing him even in the time of his of when everyone else is not receiving anything at all. There are an incredible amount of similarities. If you don't have a handout, you're probably going to need the handout because we're not going to read through these scriptures. But in the handout, I have the scriptures listed, written down for you, which they are. But the similarities in the story between Isaac and Abraham. Because actually, there's not a whole lot said about Isaac. There's much more said about Abraham. Either of them, Moses starts with either of them. Moses starts the discussion in chapter 26 and verse 1 with, there was a famine in the land. It was a different famine than what Abraham had experienced. Because these stories are going to be so closely intertwined that you may even think that he's just telling you the same story as he told about Abraham. But in fact, it's a different one. There was a famine. There was another famine. In fact, it was a different famine than what had been given in the time of Abraham. In both stories, they visit the land of Gerar. Both Abraham in chapter 20 and verse 1, he goes down to the land of Gerar, and that is where the story starts with Isaac as well. While they are in the land of Gerar, in chapter 20, verse 2, Abraham meets King Abimelech. And here in chapter 26, verse 1, Isaac has met King Abimelech. Both of the men introduce their wives as sisters. Now, it tells us that Abraham meets and calls his wife, his sister, to Pharaoh, and then later to Abimelech. But, and it's also listed for us that Isaac calls his wife his sister. They do this because both of them married beautiful women. Oh, what a horrible problem to have, that both of them marry incredibly beautiful women. That other men would want them so much so that they have introduced their wives as their sisters. They have both been blessed by God. Abraham's story, or Isaac's story, is that it starts from verses 2 to 5. God, the Lord appeared to him, Genesis chapter 26, starting in verse 2. The Lord appeared to him, do not go down to Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell you, sojourn in this land, I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your offspring I will give these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, and I will give your offspring all these lands, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge and my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So they are both going to be blessed. And in fact, it's the same blessing that God is giving to both of them. In chapter 26, as we had read, in two different verses it discusses, in verse 18 and 15, it discusses that Abraham had dug wells in the Negeb. That is the land where Gerar is located, the region there. Abraham had dug wells there, and Isaac digs the same wells. It's a very similar story to the one that the Israelites are being told about Abraham. What are some of the lessons that we can take out of that? People will despise you because God is blessing your life. Look at verse 27. In Genesis chapter 26, verse 27, Isaac said to them, why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you? They said, we see plainly that the Lord has been with you. It didn't bother them so much that they were kicking him out. He had God with him. They didn't care to know the relationship that he had with God. They didn't want to know more about his God. In fact, they wanted to stay as far away from his God as they could. You take your God and you go. We're kicking you out. But before your God gets angry with us, let's do this peacefully. Let's let you leave in peace. We're told in John chapter 15, we'll go to John chapter 15. We'll read verses 18 and 19. If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but because I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Why did Abimelech hate Isaac? Why did they send him out in the first place? Because of all of the possessions that he had. Where did he get all of those possessions? Well, some of them he actually got from Abimelech because Abimelech gave them to his father. Some of them was what God had increased. And we look and we see that in this time of famine, there's this guy Isaac over here, and he's got all kinds of belongings. We don't like his dad too much. He tried to deceive our king, so we kind of got rid of him at one point. We told him, you just stay over there. But we don't like him too much because he tried to deceive our king. And now here comes his son who has increased what he has. And it just seems like, you know what? His God is with him. He plants in this time of famine. And he gets back a more bountiful harvest than we usually expect on our best years. It's obvious. We see plainly, verse 28, that his God is with him, calls his God by name. People will seek to despise you because God is working in your life. People will seek to despise you because of your happy disposition or because you allow the joy of knowing that you're going to heaven to be seen in your life. And people will seek that out just to malign it. In this day and age, it's actually not uncommon for people to seek you out because you're a Christian so that they could possibly ridicule you because you don't believe in evolution. What person doesn't believe in evolution? They teach that in elementary school now, don't you know? Oh, don't you know? People will seek out to block your spring. We're told in Romans, let's turn to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, verse 18. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that has been revealed for us. That is, us being told to keep our chin up, even when people are speaking ill of us or treating us poorly. In Revelation chapter 2, starting in verses 9 and 10, it's written to the church at Smyrna, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say they are Jews, but are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison, that you may be tested. For 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of life. It doesn't say that you're not going to have problems. It doesn't say that if you'll pray to me, I'll take away your problems. It says, stay strong. You're going to deal with this. Stay strong, hold faith to the end. Verse 10, be faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of life. He doesn't tell Isaac, I'll just make water appear for you. The wells get filled in. He has to redig them. He has to deal with these people who are here. We're told in John chapter 4, verses 13 and 14 of Jesus being a fountain, of being able to provide life-giving water. And the woman there says, give me this water. He has a water that he is going to produce that grows in our hearts. And we cannot, and that cannot be stopped. What we have in Christ is a salvation that cannot be changed and that cannot be altered. And they can fill in the holes if they want to. And they can plug up those springs of salvation. But that doesn't change the fact that we're saved. In Romans chapter 8, starting in verse 38, for I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. People are going to come along and be a problem for you. In fact, the better Christian that you are, and the more God is reflecting in your life, the more people will come along and try to stop that. Misery loves company, and they want you to be miserable with them. What's the most miserable thing you can think of? Burning for eternity seems like it would be on that list. Being engaged in risky behavior is something that we encourage teenagers not to do. And then the school will go ahead and list, at least the school that I went to, would go ahead and list for you what risky behaviors are. Sharing needles with people. I would stop you and say that if you're doing anything to alter the function of your mind, you've engaged in risky behavior well before you shared the needle. Having unsafe sex, unprotected sex is a risky behavior. And the Bible would tell us that having any sex outside of marriage is a risky and an improper behavior. That all of the risky business that we could be involved in, that the world would put a limit on, God has put a limit on so much further back. God has limited what other people can do to affect your salvation, and that is this: no one can do anything to affect your salvation. If you're saved, you're saved, and it doesn't matter that all of these people come along with whatever naysaying that they have, and they can come along and they can malign you for your Christianity, and they can come along and call you whatever names they want to for believing in your God. They can see him working and they can hate you for it, and it doesn't do a thing to your salvation. However, Isaac's flocks were not going to get water unless he dug those wells back out. While nothing else can come from the outside and take us away from the love of Christ, we can stop loving him. We can leave those springs filled in, and we can walk away from the author of life. Because misery loves company, and they will invite you to be as miserable as they are. In John chapter 7, we'll go to John chapter 7 and read a couple of verses there. In John chapter 7, verses 37 and 38, on the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone thirst, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." While it is unlikely that someone would be able to aggravate you enough to make you leave your God, maybe direct threat on your life or that of your family could budge you off of that rock that we said that we're standing on as our invitation song this morning. I shall not be moved. Maybe there's some kind of threat and somebody could possibly move you away from your salvation. And let's say that that's unlikely for us. But they can keep you from giving it out. You made me too mad to talk to you. I just can't deal with you and show you salvation. Or, I would rather be engaged in a behavior with you that I know is improper than to teach you about God. Any affair that you might get involved in outside of your marriage or before you're married is another person who, how are you going to tell them about God? How are you going to take them to church if you're going to take them to your bed and tell them, we should learn about God and we should celebrate the salvation that he has offered. But first I want to engage in this behavior with you. I'd rather have a drinking buddy than a Bible study buddy. I'd rather have fill in your proclivity than to learn about God with you and to be able to teach you salvation. Are you able to share that living water with anyone else? We'll turn to 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. It's hard to answer with gentleness and respect when people are going around filling in the holes that your daddy dug, that God gave you. And it's a difficult thing to do in your life. There are people that we deal with daily that aggravate us and just bother us. I had bosses that I was happy to escape to Kentucky from. And I still have to pray that they'll get promoted to be away from other people. But how good am I at showing them salvation? We're not called just to be good to those who are good to us, but to those who are evil to us as well. Romans chapter 12 is where we go again. Romans chapter 12 starts with being a different person. We'll go to verse 18. Romans chapter 12 and verse 18. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Romans chapter 14 and verse 19. So then, let us pursue what makes for peace and mutual upbringing. Can we find peace with other people? Being able to find peace with those who hate you is an art, and it is beyond me. I do not try or pretend to be an expert in that field at all. But even Sun Tzu, the guy who wrote The Art of War, had thoughts on knowing who your opponent was. And I had a quote for you, but I can't give it to you or show you what it is now. It said something to the effect of, knowing when to fight is winning the fight, or something in that direction. Knowing when to and when not to fight made a great difference. Knowing that we can stand by and wait for God's destruction is an incredible tool that we have in a victory, in a war that we will have victory in. We talked about Isaac getting married. We talked about Isaac being offered as a sacrifice. And we looked at some of the similarities there of Jesus being offered as a sacrifice and Abraham being told to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And we noted that just as Abraham pulled his hand back, the angel told him, don't do that, and gives him a substitute for that sacrifice. And we know that Jesus did not have that same opportunity, that God did sacrifice Jesus for us to be our Christ. We looked at the end of that discussion that Abraham even goes back off of the mountain, and it says that Abraham goes and meets his servants, and then they go on. And the next time we see Isaac in the story is when he's meeting his wife. And we made a connection there about the next time that Jesus will be seen on this earth is when he is meeting his wife, his bride, the church. I want to add to that list of coincidences, not coincidences, but similarities between Isaac and Jesus. They're both the sons of promise. We got that when we made that connection a couple weeks ago. Their fathers are both the father of many. Whereas Abraham's name is changed to be the father of many, we're told in Galatians Chapter 4 that we are the adopted children of God, and we are many. They are both sons who have been promised to come. They are both sons of miraculous birth. They're both mentioned elsewhere in the Bible, but they both only have one big story. Jesus has a really big story, but he's really only in the Bible. He is in the Bible more often than this. Try to understand what I'm saying, in that his big story is just the Gospels. Yes, he is intertwined in everywhere in Scripture, but his one big story is the Gospels. Chapter 26 of Genesis is the one big story of Isaac. Sure, he's mentioned elsewhere, but this is his big chapter where it's all about him. Even though they are elsewhere in the Bible and they only have one big story, all of God's promises hinge on them, on both Jesus and on Isaac. All of the promises of God hinge on them. They both make water available from their father to their flock. Both Jesus and Isaac make water available from their father to their flock. And they do this without fighting at all, but by means of making peace. In the story, Isaac is usually brought up because he's sacrificed, which is a story from Abraham, and for Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau fight over their birthright, over their inheritance. And the invitation tonight is not that we should cheat anyone else out of their inheritance, but that, number one, we should never let it go. Never let your inheritance go. Not for the thing that you think you have to have, not for the fleeting pleasures of life, not for the best chili you've ever laid your eyes on. Never let the inheritance of God go. Don't let anything come between you and your God. Do not let your inheritance go. Or, if that inheritance is not yours, if you're not a child of God, you need to sell everything you have. There is nothing else more important than becoming a child of God and receiving the blessings that He has for you. There is nothing more important and nothing that you should stop at to become His child. You shouldn't let time get in your way. You shouldn't let people get in your way. You want to read the Bible and understand what it is to become a child of God? Let's do that. I'd be glad to help you and assist you with that. We can do that tonight. The last scripture that we'll look at is Colossians Chapter 1, and we'll start in verse 20 there. Speaking of Jesus in verse 20, Colossians Chapter 1, and through Him to reconcile all things to Himself, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of His cross. And you who were once alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, He is now reconciled in the body of His flesh by His death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before Him. If indeed you continue in faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you have heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. Christ made peace so that He could give water to His flocks. He commands us to become His child by entering into baptism, entering into His blood, His death, His burial, His resurrection in baptism. And we have that available. We can do that. You can purchase that birthright by the blood of Christ tonight. What hinders us? It takes a little effort to dig a well. It takes a little effort to dig a well. That's why these rich men had their servants do it. Rich old men had their servants do it. Did you know that some of these wells, they say, had to go all the way down to the underwater rivers? And where I'm from, that's 2 foot deep. Over there in Mesopotamia, in the Negev, that could be 200 feet deep. There's a whole different lesson that started to get discussed with you tonight about the digging of those wells to reach water. When you dig a hole, I've come to learn, you find rocks. Who knew? Not where I'm from. But when you dig a hole, you come up with rocks. They're worthless. They're aggravating. They're in the way, and they don't belong. Not only that, they're murder on your back or your hands. They're just dead rocks. In digging these holes, we'll read of a story where as the rocks are removed from the hole, they're set aside, and then what's made with the rocks from the hole is an altar to God, so that God can be worshipped with those same rocks. The things that keep you from becoming a Christian, the things that keep you from serving your God faithfully, are the very things that the world needs to hear you overcame. Those are the very things that the world needs to hear made your Christ die for you. You're a drunk. Yeah, that's who Christ came to die for. Even a drunk can be a Christian. You're a prostitute. You're a fill in the blank here. You're Charles. You asked for that. Christ died for you. You can be saved too. That's who He came for. To get out of the way. Get out of your own way. Whatever's between you and your God, get rid of that.